The drive home was a journey through a landscape of ghosts. 11 years. I had been gone for 11 years, moving from one army base to another, building a life 1,000 miles away from the place I was born. But the news of my grandfather's death had pulled me back, a summons I couldn't ignore. I pulled up to the house I grew up in, the engine of my rental car a low hum in the quiet street. It looked smaller than I remembered, and sadder. The once perfect garden was overgrown with weeds, and the white paint on the porch railing was peeling. It was my grandfather's house, his pride and joy. Seeing it so neglected sent a sharp pang of sorrow through my chest. I was still in my dress uniform, the dark green fabric crisp and formal. I hadn't had time to change after flying in. I took a deep breath, my hand hovering over the familiar brass doorknob. I was a captain in the United States Army. I had led soldiers in far more dangerous places than this, but nothing had prepared me for the anxiety of this moment. I knocked. After a long moment, the door creaked open. My mother, Susan, stood there. She looked older, her face etched with lines of worry I didn't recognize. When she saw me, her eyes widened with a look of pure, terrified shock. "Anna," she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Before she could say another word, a large figure appeared behind her, filling the doorway. It was her husband, Frank. I had only met him a few times before I left, but he was exactly as I remembered, big, brutish, with a charismatic smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. The smile was gone now. He physically blocked the doorway, his body a solid wall of hostility. "You're not welcome here," he snarled, his voice a low growl. I looked past him, at my mother's frightened face. "I'm here for grandfather's funeral, Frank," I said, my voice calm and even. "I'm not here to see you." I tried to step past him to get to my mother. It was a mistake. He shoved me hard, sending me stumbling back a step on the porch. "I said you're not welcome," he repeated, his face turning red, and then he threw a punch. It wasn't a wild, clumsy swing. It was fast and direct. My training kicked in, and I turned my head at the last second, but his fist still connected with my jaw. The impact was a sharp, bright explosion of pain. I tasted the coppery tang of blood in my mouth. He stood over me, breathing heavily, his chest puffed out with a pathetic bully's pride. "This is my house now," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "You don't belong here anymore. Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of." I stood there on the porch of my childhood home, a trickle of blood running from the corner of my lip. The pain in my jaw was nothing compared to the cold, clear certainty that settled over me. The part of me that had hoped for a reconciliation, for a tearful reunion with my mother, died in that moment. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I calmly, deliberately, wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my gloved hand. I looked at him, my eyes as cold and as hard as steel. I saw the flicker of confusion in his face. He had expected tears, fear, a retreat. He had not expected this quiet, unblinking stillness. I looked past his shoulder, at my mother, who was cowering in the hallway, her face a mask of terror. She had just watched her husband punch her daughter, and she had done nothing. "We'll see about that," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of an iron promise. Then I turned my back on them. I walked down the porch steps, got into my rental car, and drove away without a backward glance. He thought he had won. He thought he had asserted his dominance, protected his territory. He had no idea that he had just declared war on a woman who was a master of strategy. And he had no idea that I still held the deed to the very ground he was standing on, and a lawyer who doesn't lose. The battle for my home had just begun. The punch on the porch was not the beginning of the war. It was just the first battle in a conflict that had started 11 years ago, on the day I left home. I was 17, a girl on the cusp of adulthood, all sharp angles and sharper opinions. My father had passed away 2 years prior, and my mother, Susan, was adrift in a sea of grief. And into that sea, like a shark, swam Frank. He was a contractor who had done some work on our neighbor's house. He was charming, attentive, and full of easy compliments. He saw my mother's vulnerability not as something to be respected, but as an opportunity. He quickly made himself indispensable to her, fixing things around the house, taking her out to dinner, whispering promises of a new life in her ear. I hated him on sight. It wasn't just teenage rebellion, it was a deep, instinctual distrust. I saw the way his eyes would scan our living room, not with the warmth of a guest, but with the calculating gaze of an appraiser. He wasn't looking at my mother. He was looking at my grandfather's antique clock, at the silver tea set, at the comfortable, well-appointed life my father and grandfather had built. I saw the way he would subtly isolate my mother, discouraging her from seeing her old friends, telling her they didn't understand what she was going through. He was building a wall around her, and he was the only one with a key. The final confrontation came on a hot summer afternoon. I came home from my part-time job to find Frank's dusty pickup truck in the driveway and his work boots on the front porch. He was moving in. I found my mother in the kitchen, humming as she put away a set of new, cheap-looking dishes. "What is he doing here, Mom?" I asked, my voice tight. "Frank is moving in, Anna," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We're going to be a family." "A family?" I was incredulous. "Mom, you've known him for 3 months. You don't see what he's doing? He's a parasite. He's using you for this house for grandfather's money." She slammed a plate down on the counter. "That's enough," she cried, her voice shrill. "I will not have you disrespecting Frank in this house. He is a good man who loves me. You're just jealous. You've always been a difficult, ungrateful child." The words were like a slap. We yelled. I pleaded with her to see the truth, to see the man who was so clearly a predator. She accused me of trying to ruin her one chance at happiness. She chose him, over her own daughter. "If he stays, I go," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "Fine," she spat. "Go." So I did. I went to my room and threw my things into a duffel bag. I was crying, my whole body shaking with the force of my own betrayal. As I was about to leave, my grandfather came to my room. He had been silent during the fight, his face a mask of deep, sorrowful disappointment. He didn't try to make me stay. He knew it was too late. He just wrapped his strong arms around me and held me tight. "You are strong and you are smart, Anna," he whispered into my hair. "You will be okay. You will make me proud." As he pulled away, he slipped a thick, sealed manila envelope into my bag. "This is for a day I hope never comes," he said, his eyes full of a meaning I didn't understand. "Keep it safe. Don't open it unless you have to, and when you do, you call Mr. Davies. He'll know what to do." I hugged him one last time, then walked out the front door. Past Frank, who was sitting on the porch drinking a beer, a triumphant smirk on his face. I didn't look back. I joined the army a month later, on my 18th birthday. It was my escape. It was my chance to build a life of my own, a life of discipline and honor, a world away from the weakness and deceit I had left behind. I had kept my promise. I had made my grandfather proud, and for 11 years the sealed envelope he had given me sat at the bottom of my footlocker, a sleeping promise, waiting for the day I would finally have to come home. I didn't open the envelope for a week. I was staying in a dingy motel room in the town just outside the Army recruitment center, counting down the days until I shipped out for basic training. I was 18, alone, and my whole world had been reduced to the contents of a single duffel bag. One night, unable to sleep, I remembered my grandfather's words. "This is for a day I hope never comes." It felt like that day had arrived. I pulled the thick, heavy envelope from my bag. The flap was sealed with wax, stamped with my grandfather's signet ring. I broke the seal with a trembling finger. Inside, there was no money. There was no sentimental letter telling me how much he loved me. There were only 2 things. The first was a single folded document. It was thick, cream-colored paper, covered in dense, legal text. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Quitclaim deed." I unfolded it. It was the official deed to my childhood home, the house at 12 Oakwood Lane. I saw the property description, the legal lot number, all the official language, and then I saw the names. It was a legal transfer of property from the grantor, my grandfather, to the grantee, my name, Anna Myers. It was dated on my 18th birthday. It had been signed by my grandfather and notarized by a public official. It was a legal, binding, and recorded document. My grandfather had given me the house. My head spun. It didn't make sense. He was still alive. My mother was still living there. Why would he do this? The answer was in the second item in the envelope. It was a handwritten letter from my grandfather on his personal stationery. My dearest Anna, if you are reading this, it means your mother has chosen that man over you, and you have been forced to leave home. I am more sorry about that than I can ever say. I have tried to talk to her, but she will not listen. She is blinded by loneliness, and he is a predator. I cannot force her to see the truth, but I can protect you. And I can protect this house. This house has been in our family for 3 generations. It is your birthright. It is not hers to give away to a man like Frank. The enclosed deed is real. It is legal. On your 18th birthday, I legally transferred the full ownership of the house to you. It is yours. I have filed the original with the county, but I have also instructed my lawyer, Mr. Davies, to keep the transfer sealed in his private records. No one knows about this but me, you, and him. As far as your mother and Frank are concerned, the house is still in my name, and they believe it will pass to your mother when I am gone. This is your secret weapon, Anna. Do not use it unless you have to. Let them live their lives. But if the day ever comes when that man tries to take what is yours, if he ever tries to deny you your home, you will be ready. The deed is your proof. Mr. Davies is your ally. His number is at the bottom of this letter. He is a good man. He was my friend. He will not fail you. Be strong. Be brave. Make me proud. All my love. Grandfather. I sat on the edge of the lumpy motel bed, the deed in one hand and the letter in the other. I read it again, and then a third time. It was a plan of breathtaking simplicity and brilliance. My grandfather, knowing he couldn't win the emotional battle with my mother, had fought a different war, a legal one, and he had won it before it even began. He had given me a shield, a fortress. He had ensured that no matter what happened, my home would always be my home. For 11 years, I had kept that secret. I had built my own life in the army. I had become a captain. I had stood on my own 2 feet, never asking for a thing. I had let my mother and Frank live in my house, believing it was theirs. I had let them enjoy the fruits of my grandfather's legacy. But on the day of his funeral, when Frank stood in the doorway of my house, filled with a squatter's arrogance and threw a punch, he had done the one thing my grandfather had warned him against. He had tried to deny me my home. He had triggered the failsafe. And now, sitting in a different hotel room 11 years later, with a bruised jaw and a cold fire in my heart, I knew exactly what to do. I picked up my phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the letter. It was time to call my lawyer. The phone call to Mr. Davies was short and direct. I explained what had happened on the porch. I told him I had the original deed. I told him it was time. "I've been waiting for this call for 11 years, Captain," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He didn't call me Anna. He called me Captain. He understood the woman I had become. "Your grandfather was a wise man. He knew this day would come. Don't you worry. I'll handle the legal side. You just lay low and stay safe." While Mr. Davies began his legal assault, I started my own reconnaissance mission. I needed to know what had happened in the last 11 years. I needed to understand the enemy. I didn't call my mother. I called her next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She was a sweet, elderly woman who had known me since I was a little girl. She had sent me cookies during my first deployment. She was the closest thing I had to an ally in my old hometown. "Anna, dear," she exclaimed when she heard my voice, "I was so sorry to hear about your grandfather, and I was so worried when I saw you leave the other day. Are you all right? That man, Frank." She trailed off, her voice full of disapproval. "I'm fine, Mrs. Gable," I said. "But I need your help. I need you to tell me what's been going on. What has it been like since I left?" And she did. For the next hour, she painted a grim, detailed picture of the rot that had set into my family home. Frank, she told me, had quickly made himself the king of the castle. After my grandfather passed away 2 years ago, Frank's behavior had escalated. He quit his contracting job and began living off my grandfather's pension and savings, which my mother had inherited. He started telling everyone in town that he was a retired investor. He began to systematically sell off my grandfather's legacy. "It started with the car," Mrs. Gable said, her voice sad. "Your grandfather's beautiful old Jaguar. Frank sold it, said it was just sitting in the garage collecting dust. A few months later, I saw a new flashy sports car in the driveway. Next came the furniture. My grandfather had been a collector of antique maps and furniture. Frank held an estate sale. He told everyone your mother was downsizing, that the house was too full of painful memories," Mrs. Gable explained. "He sold almost everything. The beautiful grandfather clock, the big mahogany desk, all those lovely paintings. He was selling my childhood. He was liquidating my memories to fund his life of leisure. The house itself had suffered the most. My grandfather had been a passionate gardener. His rose garden was famous in the neighborhood. It's all gone to weeds now." "Dear," Mrs. Gable said with a sigh. "Frank paved over half of it to make more room to park his boat. The paint is peeling on the shutters, and the big oak tree in the front yard looks sick. He just doesn't care." But the most insidious part was the story he had told. He had completely rewritten our family's history. "He told everyone that you had a terrible fight with your mother and abandoned her," she said, her voice laced with anger. "He painted himself as the hero, the man who stepped in to take care of a poor, heartbroken widow whose ungrateful daughter had run off and joined the army without a backward glance. People in this town, they believe him, Anna. They feel sorry for your mother. They see him as her savior." I listened, a cold, hard knot tightening in my stomach. This wasn't just about a punch on a porch. This wasn't just about a house. This was about my grandfather's honor. Frank hadn't just moved into his home. He had desecrated his memory. He had sold off his life's treasures and poisoned his name in the town he had loved. When I hung up the phone, my resolve was absolute. I had come home to bury my grandfather. I now realized I had another task. I had to bury the man who had tried to steal his legacy, and I was going to use the law like a shovel. Mr. Davies did not waste time. He was a legal predator, and Frank had just presented himself as wounded prey. The first strike came the day of the funeral. I didn't go to the service. I couldn't stand in a church and listen to my mother and Frank eulogize the man they had so thoroughly betrayed. Instead, I paid my respects at the cemetery alone, long after the crowds had gone, leaving a single, perfect white rose on the fresh earth. The funeral reception was held at the local country club. It was, I knew, Frank's choice. A place for him to play the part of the grieving, benevolent patriarch in front of the town's most influential people. It was the perfect venue for Mr. Davies's opening salvo. A professional process server, a man with a blank face and an air of grim officialdom, walked into the middle of the reception. He located Frank, who was holding court by the bar, accepting condolences with a somber expression. In front of everyone, the server handed Frank a thick legal envelope. "You've been served," he said, his voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. The room fell silent. All eyes were on Frank. Humiliated and furious, he tore open the envelope. Inside were 2 documents. The first was an emergency eviction notice. It stated that he and my mother, Susan, were illegal occupants of the property at 12 Oakwood Lane, and that they had 48 hours to vacate the premises. The second was a temporary restraining order, citing the assault on the porch. It legally barred him from coming within 500 feet of me. Frank, I was told later by Mrs. Gable, had laughed it off. He crumpled the papers and threw them on the floor. "This is a joke," he had announced to the room. "My crazy stepdaughter is having a tantrum. Our lawyers will sort this out in a day." He tried to regain control of the room, but the damage was done. The seed of scandal had been planted. He and my mother went to see a local lawyer the next morning. The lawyer, a small-town man who was clearly out of his depth, listened to their story. He heard that Frank was married to my mother, that they had lived in the house for years, that I was the estranged daughter who had suddenly appeared. He looked at the copies of the papers they had been served. "This is outrageous," he told them. A daughter can't just evict her own mother, and as her husband, you have spousal rights to the property. This Mr. Davies is just trying to intimidate you. We'll fight this, and we'll win." Frank and my mother left the lawyer's office feeling smug and vindicated. They were the victims. I was the villain. The law was on their side. They went home to my house, convinced they had weathered the storm. They probably celebrated, laughing at my pathetic attempt to scare them. They were sitting in the living room, planning their legal counterattack, when the second wave of the assault arrived. It was another process server. This time the envelope was even thicker. Frank opened it, his expression shifting from arrogance to confusion and then to sheer, unadulterated panic. This was not a simple eviction notice. This was a formal notice of a full financial audit and a criminal complaint. The letter, drafted by Mr. Davies, was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It accused Frank of the fraudulent sale of assets, the car, the furniture, the art, that legally belonged to the owner of the house, me. It stated that since he had sold property that was not his to sell, he had committed felony theft. It informed him that Mr. Davies had hired a forensic accounting firm to conduct a full audit of my grandfather's estate and my mother's finances for the past 11 years. It demanded access to all their bank records, tax returns, and credit card statements. And the final, brutal paragraph stated that a criminal complaint had been filed with the district attorney's office for assault, theft, and multiple counts of wire and bank fraud related to loans he had taken out using the house as collateral. This was no longer a family dispute. This was no longer a tantrum. This was a multi-front legal war, and Frank had just realized he had brought a knife to a gunfight. He was not dealing with his emotional stepdaughter. He was dealing with a lawyer who doesn't lose, and an army captain who had just called in an airstrike. The arrival of the criminal complaint was the crack that shattered their world. Frank's bravado, built on a foundation of bullying and deceit, crumbled in the face of actual, serious legal consequences. The threat of jail time was a language he understood far better than family loyalty or moral duty. The forensic accountants, hired by Mr. Davies, were mercilessly efficient. They descended upon my parents' financial lives like a pack of wolves, and it didn't take them long to find the rot. Frank's entire life was a house of cards built on my family's money. The audit revealed everything. It showed the money from the sale of my grandfather's Jaguar going directly into an account that paid for Frank's new sports car. It traced the proceeds from the estate sale of the antique furniture to a series of lavish vacations he and my mother had taken. But the worst discovery, the one that turned a civil matter into a serious criminal case, was the loans. Frank, desperate for more cash to fund his lifestyle, had taken out several home equity loans against the house. My house. He had done it by forging my grandfather's signature on the initial applications years ago, and then my mother's signature on later ones. It was blatant, undeniable bank fraud. When the police, armed with a warrant and the evidence from the audit, showed up at the house, Frank's world collapsed completely. The charismatic tough guy act vanished, replaced by the pathetic, sniveling coward he had always been underneath. And like all cowards, he immediately tried to blame someone else. He blamed my mother. "It was her idea!" He had apparently screamed at the detectives as they questioned him. "She told me the house was hers. She told me to sell the furniture. I was just doing what she wanted." He tried to paint himself as the victim, a simple man who had been manipulated by a cunning, greedy woman. He threw her under the bus without a second thought, hoping to save himself. That was the final explosive fight. My mother, who had sacrificed her daughter, her integrity, and her father's memory for this man, finally saw him for what he was, a parasite, a user who would discard her the second she was no longer useful. The spell was broken. The love she thought she had was revealed to be nothing more than a long, elaborate con. Their fight, I was told by Mrs. Gable, who heard the shouting from her garden, was apocalyptic. Years of my mother's buried resentment and Frank's manipulative cruelty came pouring out. By the time the police separated them, their relationship was a smoking crater. The eviction notice gave them 48 hours. It was a brutal, humiliating scramble. They had no money. Their accounts were frozen, their credit was ruined. They couldn't afford a moving truck, let alone a new place to live. They had to sell what little they had left, their clothes, the cheap dishes my mother had been so proud of, at a pawn shop for pennies on the dollar. Frank was arrested a day later on multiple counts of fraud and felony theft. He was facing serious prison time. His legal battle was just beginning. My mother was left completely alone. Her husband was in jail. Her daughter was a stranger to her. Her home was gone. She had nothing. She had chosen the shark over her own child, and the shark had devoured her whole. She ended up at a shelter for displaced women in the next town over. The grand matriarch of Oakwood Lane was now sleeping on a cot in a crowded room, her life reduced to a single bag of belongings. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a quiet, somber sense of order being restored. My grandfather's house was finally safe. His legacy was secure. The cancer that had been rotting my family from the inside out had been surgically, ruthlessly removed. The house was empty, waiting. It was time to go home. The day I went back to the house, the air was crisp and cool. The peeling paint and the overgrown garden looked less like a tragedy now and more like a project, a blank canvas waiting for a new start. I stood on the porch in the exact spot where Frank had punched me, and I felt no anger, just a quiet sense of purpose. I had the original key my grandfather had given me all those years ago. It slid into the lock and turned with a satisfying click. The house was empty. The movers Mr. Davies had hired had cleared out the last of Frank and my mother's things, putting them into a storage unit my mother could access when she was ready. The rooms echoed with my footsteps. The walls were bare, showing the ghosts of where my grandfather's maps and paintings had once hung. The air was stale, thick with the memory of deceit and unhappiness. I opened every window, letting the fresh, clean air sweep through the house, chasing out the last of the shadows. The call from my mother came that evening. I was sitting on the floor in the empty living room, eating pizza out of a box, when my phone rang with an unknown number. I knew it was her. "Anna?" Her voice was small, fragile, almost unrecognizable. "Hello, Mom," I said. She started to cry, a raw, broken sound. "I'm so sorry, Anna," she sobbed. "I was a fool. I was so blind. He twisted everything, made me think you were the enemy. I chose him. I chose him over you, over your grandfather, over everything, and now I have nothing. I'm so sorry." I listened to her apologies. They were real, I could tell, but they were also years too late. "I know you're sorry, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But sorry doesn't fix what you broke. It doesn't change the fact that you stood there and watched him hit me. It doesn't change the fact that you let him desecrate grandfather's memory." "What can I do?" she pleaded. "Please, Anna, I have nowhere to go. Can't I just come home?" There it was, the question, the test. The old me, the dutiful daughter, would have said yes. The old me would have let her back in, and the cycle of dysfunction would have started all over again. But I was not the old me. "No, Mom," I said, and the word was not cruel, just final. "This is my home now. You can't come back here, not yet." "But where will I go?" she cried. "You will stand on your own 2 feet," I said. "For the first time in your life. You will get a job. You will find a small apartment you can afford. You will learn to take care of yourself. You will not be my responsibility. You will be your own person." I told her I would not let her be homeless. I had Mr. Davies arrange for the first and last month's rent on a small, clean apartment for her. I would make sure she had food, but I would not give her a key to my house. I would not give her a key to my life. "Forgiveness is a long road, Mom," I told her before I hung up, "and it starts with you learning to respect yourself, and me." Frank was sentenced to 5 years in prison. His charm didn't work on the judge. I spent the next year bringing my house back to life. I hired gardeners who lovingly restored my grandfather's rose garden. I had the house repainted, the shutters fixed. I started the slow, joyful process of finding new furniture, new art, pieces that reflected me. I filled the rooms not with the ghosts of the past, but with the promise of the future. One sunny afternoon, I was sitting on the front porch, the same porch where the war had begun. The paint was fresh and white, and pots of bright red geraniums lined the steps. I held the old, original deed in my hand, the paper soft and worn. I had done it. I had reclaimed my home. I had honored my grandfather's legacy. I had come home not just to a house but to myself. I was a captain. I was a homeowner. I was a daughter who had learned to draw a line in the sand, and I was finally, completely, at peace.